Well, I'm not quite sure how I'm supposed to follow that, but thank you, Joan. Before we get started, let's go ahead and close our eyes and bow our heads and go to a moment of silence for the moms we've lost this year and just a remembrance of those. Thank you. Once again, thank you, Joan, for that. That was amazing. And it's with a heavy heart looking back at the center pew back there and not seeing Jane on this Mother's Day. As Rick did, I guess I'll start with saying Happy Mother's Day. It's going to be a little bit different of a sermon this morning, a little bit different of a message this morning. I didn't want to bring anything too heavy or too astounding or anything else like that. I just wanted to keep it a simple message this morning. Because I know most of us want to get out of here and celebrate our mothers and gather with those we love and those we have with us. So this morning I get to brag a little bit on my own mom and on my wife, who is a mother. But as I was thinking about this message this morning, I was thinking about the Bible and all the mothers that are represented in the Bible, especially throughout the Old Testament. And I was thinking about the characteristics that all of these mothers had in common. And we're going to go through 10 different characteristics this morning. There are no particular order other than alphabetical. However, we moved into the parsonage last night, so if a couple of these are out of order, you'll understand why. In fact, Krista and the girls are in the back nursery there. Krista had a hard time finding our clothes this morning. So we've been sorting through boxes, trying to find outfits that are suitable. I guess I'm dressed, so I did okay this morning. But as we move into this, these are in no particular order other than alphabetical. And as we go through these characteristics, I'll go through the Old Testament and describe the mother to help bring this characteristic a little bit more emotion. And if we think about motherhood, you can't help but think about the word brave. Brave. I can't think of anything more brave than a woman going through 9 months of carrying a child inside of her own body and then giving birth to that human. Krista may not think of herself as brave, but when I think of that first time of becoming pregnant with Brinley and they're getting her prepped for surgery because of the C-section that she was about to have, because we give birth to big babies. We make big babies, and Krista wasn't big enough to deliver that baby naturally. But Krista never once complained, never once seemed scared. I don't know whether it was the anesthesia kicking in and she had no idea what was about to happen to her. But she knew that this was a part of motherhood. And if we look through the brave mothers throughout the Bible, I could name off almost every single mother within the Old Testament. But if we look at Sarah, the wife of Abraham, who would give birth to Isaac, you can imagine how brave she was in her advanced years, close to 90 years old. And God says she is about to give birth. The bravery that had to take. If we look at the mother of Moses, Jochebed, that despite knowing the birth of her son was illegal, she hid her child for 3 months, knowing the ramifications of what would have happened if she was caught. If we look at the Virgin Mary, how brave she was to be just a teenager when she found out she was going to give birth to the Savior. And then at 9 months pregnant, she would travel halfway across the country, mainly by foot, The amount of bravery that had to take to travel for at least 3 or 4 nights at 9 months pregnant over mountains and through valleys, through rain and heat, all to give birth to the Savior. Calm. Now, this is one of those that Krista is self-professed not so good at. But calm. When I think of my own mother, I think of calm. And how her presence seems to calm everybody else around her down. Sarah was advanced in age, was getting up there. She was married to Zechariah, who was a religious leader of the time, who was very, very kind of high-strung and never really held back on his thoughts on things. But Elizabeth was growing old and never had a child yet. But yet an angel came to her and said, "You will give birth to a son, and his name will be John, and he'll be the forebearer of Jesus, the forebearer of the Messiah." It would have been very easy for Elizabeth to get excited and overjoyous about this. But yeah, if we look at Luke chapter 1, verse 25, Elizabeth says here, "The Lord has done this for me. In those days he has shown his favor and taken away my disgrace among the people." Her disgrace was the fact she was so advanced in age, and yet she had never had a child. And yet God was going to do this for her. It would have been easy to get excited about that, but yet she remained calm and showed that it was because of God blessing her that this was about to happen. In fact, when the 2 wombs were together, when Elizabeth was with Mary, it says that John leapt with joy inside of the womb at just the mere presence of Jesus. Calm. Consistent. Now, this is one of those keys to parenthood, but I think mothers do a very good job of showing consistency more than, well, I do, that's for sure. No, Brindley, you can't have that cupcake, it's 9:30. Well, it's been 15 minutes and you keep asking me, go ahead, have that cupcake. Krista does a much better job of consistency than I do. Consistency is one of those gifts I think God gave to mothers because he knew fathers would fail so hard at it. But if we look at consistency, one of the mothers that comes to mind, and it's one of those mothers that isn't named in the Bible, but you can tell through her son how much consistency she had. That's the mother of Samson. I think of her as the quintessential picture of consistency. If we look at Judges chapter 13, the angel of the Lord appeared to her and said, "You are barren and childless, but you're going to become pregnant and give birth to a son. Now see to it that you don't drink wine or other fermented drink, and that you do not eat anything unclean. You will become pregnant and have a son whose head is to never be touched by a razor, because that boy is to be a Nazirite dedicated to God from the womb. He will take the lead in delivering Israel from the hand of the Philistines." And so as a Nazirite, Samson grew up never touching a drink, never touching anything fermented, never touching anything declared unclean, and never once cutting his hair. I can't imagine never once cutting his hair, because my mom, when I was little, would cut my hair probably twice a week. My hair was always kept short, kept clean, kept tidy. I was always to look presentable, whatever that meant. But consistency. And we know the story of Samson, who would later grow up and strong because of his hair and because of his dedication to God. We know that mothers can only go so far, and we know Samson struggled with his desire for women and his desire for food and his desire for drink. But I believe God chose to reward Samson's mother's consistency. And that's why he was able to do the things he did. Despite himself, he was blessed through his mother. Fierce or ferocity. I think this is one of the most overlooked attributes or characteristics of a mother. Krista has a sweater that has Mama Bear across it. She is one of the nicest, sweetest women I've ever met in my entire life. And that's one of the main things that drew me first to Krista. But the moment you cross one of her girls, she becomes almost a completely different person. My sister, if she's watching this online, she'll remember the story of my mom. My mom was very much the same way, and I can almost guarantee all of our moms were kind of fierce in this aspect. Back when me and my sister were growing up, Pokemon cards were big. In fact, Pokemons are actually making a comeback, or never really went away, but me and my sister would carry our Pokemon cards proudly in our backpacks, and well, at school, we weren't allowed to take them out, otherwise we were going to get in trouble. Well, it was time for bus, and me and my sister actually got picked up from school. And so school was dismissed, and well, my sister had her Pokemon cards out. And my sister promptly got her Pokemon cards taken away. 15 minutes later, my mom was in the guidance counselor's office. I've never heard my mom quite that angry before. But mothers are known for their ferocity and their temperament when it comes to their cubs, if you will. But if we look at fierce mothers of the Bible, I think of Pharaoh's daughter. Pharaoh's daughter who took Moses from the river that she was bathing in and chose to raise Moses as her own. Now, we know there's a little bit more to this story, but the fact that her father was the one who ruled that Moses should have been put to death, she takes this child, knowing full well that he is a Hebrew, and raises him as her own. Or if we look at Rebekah, who would give birth to twins, who would fight constantly, even in the womb themselves. The ferocity that Rebekah protected Jacob is something amazing. Despite being a warning about how we shouldn't choose favorites when it comes to children, Rebekah's ferocity in fighting for Jacob goes even to the point of going against her own husband, of deceiving her own husband in regards to her son. If we look at Hagar, the servant of Abraham, who Sarah, who grew in old age, didn't think she'd have a child, and so she told Abraham to sleep with Hagar, and then Hagar became pregnant. Hagar fought against the disposition of Sarah. After Sarah couldn't have her own child, Hagar became with child. And so Sarah despised her over this, hated her over this. Hagar couldn't take this anymore, and with her own child, left into the wilderness to go back to her people. The ferocity that must have taken to give up absolutely everything you knew, the entire safety of being within Abraham and Sarah's home, she left. Now later she was told by an angel to return, to go back to that home, and that her descendants would be as numerous as Sarah and Abram's. Forgiveness. I don't think there's any known person other than mothers who are the best at forgiveness or best at teaching forgiveness. We can look back at the example of Hagar and Sarah. Hagar would return to becoming a servant under Sarah. Can you imagine that? The forgiveness that would have to take, whether the personal forgiveness to continue to do that job despite all opposition. Or if we look at the story of Rachel and Leah and their maidservants, who Isaac would fall in love with Rachel, And he would work for Laban for 7 years just to have the chance to marry Rachel. And when he wakes up after his wedding night, it's Leah that he was tricked into marrying. And so Isaac works another 7 years for Rachel's hand. Can you imagine being tricked into marrying the love of your life's sister? And yet, Isaac's love never stopped for Rachel. And yet they still had to live together under Old Testament covenant law. And they had children. Isaac had children with Leah, and then Rachel would end up dying, giving birth to her son Benjamin. But it is said that Benjamin and Joseph were Isaac's favorite children, born to him from Rachel. But on top of that, they also had children with the maidservants as well. So Isaac had children with Leah's servant, and with Leah, and with Rachel's servant, and with Leah, and so that's the birth of the 12 tribes of Israel. You can later see why there was so much trouble with the 12 tribes. But yet there was forgiveness there. Can you imagine the forgiveness that it took Mary after 3 days of traveling and then realizing they forgot Jesus in the temple? Jesus teaching and preaching at 12 years old in the temple. Can you imagine how mad Mary was when she came back after those 3 days? I can look back at my own life, and I told you about my dad doing this thing where I'd say something stupid and then I'd just automatically lean my head forward and I'd get a nice little smack in the back of the head. I can't imagine what Mary was going through, or how many times she smacked Joseph in the back of the head for forgetting this Messiah in the temple for 3 days. Them traveling in a caravan and them thinking that, oh, he's back with Uncle Bartholomew or whoever, when really they left him in Jerusalem. Sidebar, me and Krista have never left any of the girls anywhere that we know of. We have 3. I've counted 3 every day, so we're doing something right. Knowledge, or knowledgeable. I have to admit here that growing up, I was a mama's boy. I know that might be shocking and surprising for some of you, but I was a mama's boy. And I can't tell you the number of lessons that I learned from our conversations late at night to where I couldn't sleep, and she knew I couldn't sleep, and so she would sit beside my bed, and we would just talk for 1, 2, 3 hours. Until I was able to fall asleep, she was there beside me, just talking about whatever we would talk about. And I think that's where I learned the most about life, was just talking with my mom in those conversations. But if we look at knowledge and we look at a biblical exploration of knowledge, the story of Naomi and Ruth comes to mind. Where Ruth marries the son of Naomi, and then not far after that, her son dies. But yet, Ruth stays loyal to Naomi. Despite having no more connection, and despite Naomi pleading with Ruth to go back to your home country, go back to the prospect of maybe starting over again, she doesn't. She stays with Naomi. And not only on top of staying with Naomi, she actually learned the faith of Naomi. She learns of the God of Naomi, the God that we serve. Ruth decides to serve. And if we're talking about knowledge, I can't think of a greater piece of education or greater piece of knowledge to pass down to someone is your faith. Loving, or love, or nurturing. let's face it, sometimes this is only a thing a mother can do or a thing a mother can provide. I'll admit it, sometimes I'm not very nurturing. I don't provide the love that I should sometimes, especially when it's 10 o'clock at night and we're trying to get ready for bed and there's Brinley running around last night with a cupcake after her 4th cupcake. Thank you for the cupcakes, by the way. I'm not saying anything against them. They were great. Brinley loved them as well, a little bit too much. And my words may have been a little bit harsh as I told her to go to the table and eat that cupcake. And that would indeed be her last cupcake. In fact, I think there's only like 4 more. Okay. I'll let Brinley know. She'll be over this afternoon. But the very name Eve, the very first mother of the Bible, is a name that brings up nurture and care. In fact, she was the very woman taken from the side of Adam to help take care of the very garden itself. God created mothers and created women to be that nurturing care when man couldn't be. In fact, we look at the story of Naomi and Ruth, and Naomi takes Ruth almost as her own daughter. And they live and they grow together. Rachel loved Isaac. Despite all the deception of falling in love with his sister and marrying the sister, despite all of that, Rachel still showed love and still showed compassion. And we go back to Pharaoh's daughter, raising Moses as her own. This is one of the greatest examples between the story of Naomi and Ruth and the story of Pharaoh's daughter raising Moses, of love of a mother of a non-biological upbringing. The love of an adopted mother, whether a legal adoption or a physical adoption or a mental adoption, that love that a mother shares for whichever child is unmatched by probably only God himself. Let's look at the next one of loyal. Loyal. That loyalty only a mother can provide. If we look back to the story of Rebekah giving birth to her sons Jacob and Ishmael, they warred inside of her womb. They fought even inside of the womb. And I thought Harper and Brinley were bad. They fought inside the womb. But if we look at Genesis 25, it says here, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. One will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. The older will serve the younger, which flew in the face of everything that their culture even stood for. The oldest child would have received everything. But here an angel of the Lord is telling Rebekah that the younger will serve the older. And as Ishmael and as Isaac or Jacob were taken from the womb, Jacob clung to the heel of Ishmael. And the name Jacob actually means heel grabber. Even in all of that, even in the story of deception, even in the story of picking a favorite child, my sister's the favorite child. Even in all of that, Rebekah is loyal to God's will of Jacob becoming the more powerful of the brothers. I think that's an amazing story that gets overlooked. Rebekah's loyalty to God's plan. Were there selfish motives? Yes. I don't know of any story where there isn't some selfish motive that creeps in, but the loyalty that Rebekah shows is something I don't think we should ignore. We can look at the loyalty of Ruth remaining with Naomi. And in fact, learning everything that she knows about her new culture from Naomi. In fact, it was all of Naomi's lessons to Ruth that would eventually lead to the line of David, which would lead eventually to the line of Jesus. Without Naomi's lessons, without Naomi and Ruth's loyalty to one another, that line would have been gone. Patience. Patience. This is one of those that Krista says she isn't good with, but I think she deserves a little bit more credit than she gives herself. Patience. I remember a couple years ago when Krista and I first got married, we were so ready to start a family. Because I've said it from here multiple times that the only thing I ever actually knew was I wanted to be a dad. I wanted to be a dad. That was the only thing I really ever knew until God brought me into ministry 3 years ago. But I wanted to be a dad. Krista wanted to be a mom. I mean, she wanted to be a librarian too and work in the kids department, and she wanted to spoil those kids with reading. But she wanted to be a mom. And it took us 2 years. 2 years we waited for Brindley. In fact, we didn't know if we were going to be able to have children of our own. And that part absolutely devastated us. Because all we knew was we wanted to be parents, but we didn't know if we were going to be able to have children. But God said, patience. Patience. I don't know how many times God has told us patience through our lives. But every time we were patient, God provided in the perfect timing. We weren't ready to be parents when we first got married. We didn't even know how to be married, let alone be parents. And in the apartments that we had and the lives that we were trying to forge for ourselves, there was no room for a child. There was no room for Brindley until about 2 years when we bought our first house and had a room of our own and actually had life going in the right direction, that we were able to be parents. And then we knew we wanted another. We knew how hard the pregnancy was the first time on Krista, but we knew we weren't done being parents. And it was actually harder waiting the 9 months it took for us to get pregnant with Harper than it was the 2 years to get pregnant with Brindley. Because we knew it was possible at this point that we could have our own kids. And so trying to have Harper, trying to get pregnant with Harper was the hardest thing that we had ever done. And we thought maybe God was telling us one was enough. And so those were probably some of the hardest 9 months that we had gone through in trying to become pregnant with Harper. And then God has some weird sense of humor that we had a night away. One night away without the girls, and then here comes Brooklyn. How scary that was to find out we're having the third in less than 2 years. But yet God knew it was the right time. And God knew our patience was rewarded through that. But we can look through story after story of patience in the Bible. In fact, Hannah was growing in her old age, and she'd go to the temple day after day, praying to God, wanting a child. That's all she prayed for, was a child. And God blessed her patience. And she gave birth to a son named Samuel, who she then gave over to the church. The very first son that she had, she instantly gave back to God, not knowing if she'd ever have another child ever again. And yet her first instinct, her first notion was to give that child over to God. And then Samuel would go on to bless Saul and then bless David. And David would go on to bless the line of Jesus. We mentioned Elizabeth earlier, and Elizabeth was in her old age. She had never had a child, and yet God said, I will reward your patience with John. If we look back at the story of Sarah giving birth to Isaac, Isaac literally means in Hebrew laughter. Because Sarah actually laughs at the angel who is sent to her, saying that she will give birth to a son. Sarah laughed, maybe at God, questioning this whole thing, that at 90 years old, she was going to be a mother. The very last one we have this morning, sacrificial or sacrifice. I don't know of anybody else who is more selfless than a mother. In fact, there's a pretty well-known story within my family that my mom wanted to become a nurse. That's all my mom really wanted to do, was become a nurse and to take care of people. But the thing was, if my mom went to nursing school, she would have to go to a different school than my dad. And they wouldn't be able to stay together because they'd be at different schools. And so my mom gave up the opportunity or the chance to go to nursing school to stay with my dad. My mom gave that up. But after giving that up, staying with my dad, she had 2 kids. And so she was able to provide care, able to sacrifice, able to give us an example of how to sacrifice, of how to love, of what love meant to her children. And I mentioned the story of Hannah. We mentioned the story of Jochebed, of giving up Moses. But what we didn't mention was the sacrifice of Mary. The Virgin Mary gave birth to Jesus. Gave birth knowing that one day her son would be the ultimate sacrifice. That her son would save all of humankind. I can't imagine being Mary and giving birth to Jesus knowing that. Knowing that her son's purpose was to save all of mankind. As we close out, we'll have Ann come back up and we'll go into a time of invitation.